Hey everybody, welcome back to Ed Gasket. If you're new to this channel, welcome. My name is Ed and I hope you enjoyed today's video so much so that you consider subscribing to this channel, or heck, even consider heading over to edgasket.com to get yourself one of these brand new Worker Man t-shirts. That way you have something new and soft to cover up your nipples. If you've been by the channel recently, you know we just picked up a 1986 Honda 125 three-wheeler, and the purpose of this video is to share with you my top 3 tips for the first 3 things you should do after buying a new, to you, Honda three-wheeler. Now, like I said, this is a 1986 model, which means it's about 35 years old, and that means this has had anywhere between 5, 10, maybe 15 different owners, and that is a lot of abuse. So I'm going to share with you my 3 tips to make sure you get the most fun out of your new toy. Now, these old machines have metal tanks and carburetors, which are 2 areas for rust or corrosion. Even if you leave it full of fuel, the sediment in the tank can cause corrosion, and even if you think you're doing it a good deed by draining all the fuel before you store it, well, the moisture in the air can rot that tank from the inside out. So the first thing we're going to do, and the first tip in today's video, is to drain that fuel tank and clean that carburetor. So let's go ahead and drain that fuel tank and clean that carburetor. Alright guys, the carburetor and our fuel system has been completely cleaned, and the next step is to make sure we drain all the fuel out of this tank. So I'm going to use this fuel line to connect to the petcock and let it drain into this container. Now there's not much fuel left, but while we let this drain, let's move on and talk about mandatory tip number 2. Yeah, got to open the petcock. There we go. Damn it. Okay, well, I'm going to find a way to make sure this doesn't leak. And in the meantime, let's talk about mandatory tip number 2. Now guys, tip number 2 is similar to tip number 1 in that we don't know what degree of maintenance this machine has been privileged to in its 35-year lifespan. So we need to perform at least a partial engine service to make sure this thing's ready to go for our first ride. Now let me show you a few of the things that I'm talking about, because I have a feeling that this thing hasn't seen any maintenance whatsoever in a long time. So guys, one of the first things you'll notice when you walk up to this machine is this piece of cardboard with that drop of oil on it.
What a piece of junk!
Now that presents a few problems. Number 1, this machine's leaking oil, but number 2, notice how black that oil looks. So let's go ahead and do a complete oil service. That means draining all the oil out of the motor, exchanging that oil filter, and then replenishing it with brand new lubricant. Guys, another tip for you here. You can see your dipstick is right here. Before you unscrew this thing to put new oil in your engine, make sure that you clean up that rim so that no dirt or debris lands inside your engine, which could ultimately ruin your motor. Or you could just do what most people do, and that's just unscrew this really fast and look the other way. All right, guys, as you saw, we just changed our oil and swapped out that old oil filter that was totally beat up and actually was dissolving in my hands. And we also changed out that rubber O-ring that was likely the cause of our oil leak. So we have new oil and our machine is no longer leaking. So in the amount of time it took us to do that, I'm hoping our fuel tank is completely out of gas. All right, guys, this fuel tank's completely empty. You can see it was just a little bit of fuel that we had to get out of there. This thing was previously winterized by the previous owner before I bought it, so I had to put a little splash in there to make sure it ran before I gave that guy a whole bunch of our money. Now, the inside of this tank is completely mint and rust-free, so we can go ahead and mount this thing back on the machine and then move on to my favorite tip of today's video, tip number 3. All right, guys, my last piece of mandatory advice for you to follow with your new three-wheeler before you head out on that first ride is to make this thing unique to you. Now, for you, that might mean replacing a bent set of handlebars, worn out grips, a snapped brake lever. Now, other people might want to replace a bald set of tires with a new set to make it unique to them. Fortunately, we're not suffering from any of these problems right now, but as I look over my shoulder, I see the perfect opportunity to make this three-wheeler unique to its new owner. All right, guys, check it out. It's all finished. It took about 30 minutes worth of wrestling with that thing to get it in the position that I wanted, but it turned out really nice. It was totally worth all the hard work and time put into it. And now it officially looks way different than it did when the previous owner had it, giving it a unique look for a unique owner. So guys, although this is my top 3 pieces of advice for you before you go on your first ride with your new 3-wheeler, this is not an exhaustive list. There are many other things you have to do to this machine to make sure it stays maintained. It's old, it's like 35 years old, it's been ridden really hard. Things that you're gonna have to do like change the spark plug, change out the chain and sprockets, convince all your friends to buy them, among many other things. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to subscribe to Ed Gasket and check out some other content taking place in the garage. Hit up Ed Gasket Garage on Instagram if you want content between videos, and as always guys, if you need us between now and our next video, we'll be in the garage.